all systems go. Clear for liftoff.
What's going on, golf fans? It's your boy GS Luke here with our DFS live stream for this week's Rocket Mortgage Classic. Going to get you guys ready for all of your lineups this week with a look at the weather report, some of the strategy heading into main slate. We'll go through any player deep dives that you've got for me in the live chat, as well as a little bit of lineup construction towards the end to tie it all together. So that'll give you a good idea of what to expect over the next 30 minutes or so. But anything you guys want to add on top of that, that is what the live chat is for. But other than that, let's hopefully get after it this weekend. Hopefully you're having a fantastic week so far. We got Allen down there, Brant as well, also the Carolina Reaper. And it looks like Allen has a little bit of boots on the ground access for us, which is always nice on a week like this. So anyone that's in Michigan, maybe able to get out there on the golf course themselves, enjoy it. It's a fun golf course. I want to get up there at some point to see Detroit Golf Club. We got MN Holla down there too. Let's get after it, guys. So any specific questions, don't be shy at all to go ahead and throw those down in chat. Let's get this thing rocking. So they got the Rocket Mortgage Classic, which is always a birdie fest. And based on the course conditions and the weather over the last few days, it's probably going to be even more so of a birdie fest this year. The reason I say that is some of the rain that they've gotten in the area. And we got confirmation down in the chat from Alan that that is exactly the case. So this golf course is always one of the softer ones that you play. The rough really isn't all that substantial. It is listed at 4 inches, but it's extremely spotty. You don't really have 4-inch consistent rough like you get at other golf courses. It's more closer to like 1.5, 2 inches in some spots, which is, I would actually say, is a majority of the golf course. And then 4 inches in like maybe 1 or 2 holes around the 18. So that's why it plays so easy out there. And that's only going to be exacerbated by the fact that for the first few days, there's not going to be that much wind to speak of. So if you get out on a soft and a calm golf course, you can see scores into the low 60s, which for a par 72 setup is unique. You don't always see low 60 scores when you have a par 72, but you get guys getting the -7, -8 quite regularly around this type of venue. It's easy to hit fairways. It's easy to hit greens. Like you can see at the dark green here towards the top. And overall, most of the averages that you're seeing on here are easier than your PGA Tour average course. So that's why we call it a birdie fest, and why stats like birdie or better percentage, shots gained off the tee, driving distance to take advantage of the drivable 4s and the par 5s becomes so important on a week like this. So that's the golf course. We've seen it for 4 or 5 years at this point. We have a really good idea of how it plays. It's a little bit of a Bombers fest. You can see with the Bombers Paradise ranking, the approach shot distribution skews a little bit shorter than what we usually see on tour. And that is because of the amount of short par 4s, where if you hit a driver, you're going to have less than 150 yards for your second shot. So that's another reason why you see so many birdies around here, along with the fact that there are 4 par 5s to attack as well. The other thing we want to look at would be the weather over the first few rounds, which I do think there could be a little bit of a lean towards the the PM AM guys, but let's go through exactly why that's the case. So tomorrow is not really where we see that kind of an edge. The winds are going to be non-existent for most of the day. You do have a storm that's supposed to come in around 11 a.m. and then a much bigger storm that's coming in about 4 p.m. I would say that the one around 11 doesn't look like that much of an issue. It's just a little bit of a sprinkle that comes through. The one around 4, though, where it's an inch of rain that they're expecting in that single hour, could lead to a delay in play. So that's why I want to preface this with the fact that it could be a potential weather edge, because any sort of a delay tomorrow would kind of take it away, because the edge is when it comes to Friday. And if you take a look at Friday, you'll see that the forecast looks a little bit windier. So tomorrow, I think they're going to score like crazy. I think you're going to see -5 to -7, -8 rounds like they're nothing. Friday, though, it could be a little bit more difficult in the afternoon. So I was mentioning a potential edge towards the PM/AM guys if they can get out there early on Friday morning and take advantage of slightly calmer conditions. The HRRR hasn't completely loaded in yet, so let's go to the GFS to maybe get a little bit of a better picture with an entire forecast. GFS has sub 10 miles an hour of sustained winds the entire morning. The wind gusts go from about 10 miles an hour in the morning to closer to 20 plus in the afternoon. And the sustained winds go from 5 to 6 miles an hour to about 12, even 13, 14 miles an hour sustained towards Friday afternoon. Now, any sort of a delay on Thursday would completely throw that off, though, because let's assume that tomorrow afternoon they have like an hour and a half, maybe a 2-hour delay. If the rain comes down too hard and they can't keep play going, there's a chance that they have to take them off, draft the course, and then get back out there. It wouldn't be like a substantial delay or anything, but even if it's only like 2 hours and they can't finish up completely, that does start to take away from any potential edge that we have on Friday. So I think to begin with, it's a little sketchy anytime we're trying to predict weather from 2 days out, but especially sketchy when you have so much rain coming in over that 24-hour period as well. I mean, whether it's Thursday afternoon or Friday morning, you can see some rain in that forecast too. There's just a lot of chance for it to go to shit. So the way that I'm playing the slate when it comes to the weather, which I think is the prudent thing to do if you're playing more than, let's say, just a handful of lineups, is to have some exposure to that PM AM side. So for example, I'm a 150 max player. I took 15 lineups and took them with only guys starting on that side of things. But 15 of my 150 lineups is 10% of them. That is not a substantial portion that I'm playing with any sort of a weather edge. I think where it's more impactful with my exposure was more so with the guys I was adding into my player pool towards the very end. When I was looking for 7K players to round off and get to the amount that I needed for a 150 max exposure, I only took PM guys that were marginal, and I still have a lot of cheap guys that are on the AM side of things. So, don't, take that to mean that I'm going out there and only playing my cheap guys from the PM AM side. But when I was trying to find guys to add in last second, I thought, why not make sure that they're on the right side of the tee time? So I think that if anything, it is a slight lean towards that direction. And I think the bigger edge could be for Friday Showdown, where if we get to round 2 Showdown, which by the way, we'll have a live stream tomorrow night, right? Getting you guys ready for that. If we see that there's no delay, there's going to be less wind in the morning like we see in this GFS. That could be the spot to go out there and really play the weather. So it's not a massive part of my process. Really, it's just a tiny little sprinkle I'm taking just in case we have like a half a stroke, maybe a 0.6, a 0.7 stroke advantage in that direction. But that would be about the maximum that it could be. I think more than likely it'll be like a 0.1, a 0.2 shot difference towards that side, which is somewhat significant. I mean, it's not like you can completely ignore that, I guess, especially if, two guys were 50-50 across the board and one was AM, one was PM. Even if it is only a 0.2 shot difference, maybe you could use it to break some ties, but that is as far as I would take it when it comes to this weather. And just for completion's sake, we will go to the HRDPS. So another model here that hasn't really loaded in yet, but so far, you can see on Friday, they're calling for not a lot of wind in that morning wave. NEM forecast is usually our go-to when we're trying to take a look at Friday. Morning looks a lot calmer than the afternoon there, both from the sustained wind perspective. It's almost double the wind in the afternoon, but also the wind gusts are even more significantly different from morning to afternoon. I mean, it's pretty much non-existent wind gusts, the same as the sustained wind from about 7 to 9. Afternoon, you've got 20 to even 25, 26 miles an hour of sustained winds on Friday. So that could be quite a big difference from the morning to the afternoon, which Showdown, I'm really going to be keeping an eye on that for our round 2 live stream. But even for main slate could be worth considering. So that's the weather. We're going to go through some player deep dives and all of that now. So let me bring up our ownership. We're going to use that to lead off our player pool discussion. And then, like I said, any sort of players you want me to deep dive with the shots gained metrics, it can be event history, recent form, you guys name it. That is what this time is going to be for. So let's start with the ownership and then get to any of those questions and round this thing off. So towards the top, I like to go through the ownership from 8K plus. So these are not from the SHIPIT site. These are from my Patreon page. So a little bit different than what they have to offer over there. But in general, a lot of these projections, I haven't checked SHIPIT Nation's projections quite yet. I'd assume that they're pretty similar across the board. I mean, they're usually not too far off from where I have a lot of my things. And it's because they have good ownership projections just like I do. So you wouldn't expect them to be too drastically different in any cases. But what you'll see towards the top is that there are 3 guys in the 9-10K range that are really getting all the attention this week. And that would be last week's champion, Keegan Bradley. Patrick Cantlay is even getting some attention too. But Ben Griffin being the number 1 player in recent form heading into this week and at $9,800 is always going to get a ton of attention from the masses. And what we have here that is a little bit different than a lot of slates we've been playing lately is we don't have a Scotty or a Rory McIlroy in this field. The result of that is that the pricing is a lot softer towards the top end of the board. DraftKings just couldn't find it in themselves to go out there and make some of these guys like $10,000. Like they couldn't throw Cam Young at like 10 grand. It just probably rubbed them the wrong way. And so they put them down there at $9,300. And I saw a few ownership sites out there. I was looking on early on Tuesday at a few of the sites that had them posted early, and I was running analytics on the projections that they had posted. And I'm not going to name names. This isn't a site where I'm going to slander anyone. That's just not the right thing to do. But there were a few sites out there that were leaving like $500 to $1,000 on average on the table. And what that tells me, and what I could see it in their projections, is that they didn't have enough ownership for some of these guys towards the top end of the board. They didn't have guys at over 20% at the top end of the 9K range, which could make sense if it's a slate with Scotty, a slate with Rory, and you've got somebody at like 40% at the top end of the board. But it's like a few of the sites kind of forgot how to make projections after not having those guys in the field, and was leaving a whole bunch of salary on the table. So that's why, joining a site like mine or the SHIPIT Nation crew, where, you can rely on the projections and they're running those analytics, knowing exactly what the average salary used on what they're throwing out there. That's why it's so important, because if you don't have those sort of projections, you're going to see the top end of the board vastly under projected. So a lot of the guys up here that are getting that steam, like a Keegan, a Ben Griffin, really stand out. They're nearly 30% owned. So if you're going to try and get leverage on them, you can't throw them into 35, 40% of your lineups and think that you're going to be getting a whole bunch of leverage there. And, in some GPPs, they may end up being closer to like 20 to 23% or something like that. But even then, right, if you want leverage to those sort of players, let's say it's a 20 max contest where the exposure is closer to that kind of number, you've got to play them in 40, 50% of your lineups to get that kind of a leverage. It's not who you play, it's how you play them. That is always the case, with especially this chalk towards the top end of the board. But commit to your guys up top if you're going to use them. That would be my main piece of advice, especially seeing some of the sites that had the top end of the board so underprojected, is don't think that like 30% is going to get it done unless you're talking about Hideki might even be closer to like 10% projected owned in some of like the single entries, some of like the smaller field stuff where maybe it's a higher dollar entry fee to get into it. I could see not as many people taking the shot on Hideki Matsuyama in that sort of format. Maybe he'll be closer to 10% and you could use him in 25% and get, well over that 2x leverage mark. But everyone else up there, you've really got to commit to. So on a Monday, if you guys watch the content that I had on my YouTube channel, you guys would know that I'm a fan of Patrick Cantlay and Cam Young this week. They're 2 players that bet outright. I think they fit this golf course quite well. Does that mean that they're 100% going to? Of course not. I get shit up wrong all the time, right? That's just the life of being a PGA DFS tout. It's tough to get stuff right, especially towards the top end of the board. We have so many quality players to choose from. But if you didn't love the guy on Monday, this is always my take with chalk in the 9-10K range. If they were somebody you were considering outright betting, if you looked at the board, you looked at the price tag and you were like, okay, that's a no-brainer play, then totally fine using a player towards the top. That's like 20 to 30% owned. But if you weren't on them on a Monday, they're kind of sketchy. You had any sort of doubt about somebody that's like 25 to 30% owned, the prudent thing to do most times is not to use them in your lineups, because you're going to be tempted to want to play a lot of these chalky guys towards the top. Let's be honest about the chalk. It's chalk for a reason. There's a reason why a lot of these guys are getting a little bit more steam than some of the other players around them. And the vast majority of the time, not every single time, but a vast majority of the time, it's because of the form heading in, which is helpful. It is a data point that we use to handicap golf, but it's not the end all be all as well, especially when we get bounce back candidates that happen all the time out here. So that's why if you have any semblance of doubt about these guys that you see as chalk in this projected ownership tab, then rip them out of your player pool. That includes a Cantlay. That includes a Cameron Young, right? That's why I preface it with, I'm not always right when it comes to my core plays, right? If you have a take on, any hot takes on these guys up top and you think that, they're not going to get there, rip them out of your player pool would be my main piece of advice. Now, you can't do that with every piece of chalk towards the top. There's going to be a piece or two that likely gets there still. However, there are spots where you can make those kind of determinations. So it's a move down to the 9 and 8K range now to give you guys an idea what the ownership looks like there. So it starts to flatten out a bit, but it's not completely flat in this 8 and 9K range. Bottom end of the 9K range, a lot of guys in that like 12% range. Siwoo Kim probably would have been chalk here. And because of the withdrawal and some of the concerns with, I think it was his back, maybe some people don't want to get there. Luke Clanton, he didn't have the best traveler. So also, if he had come in with any sort of form, he probably would have been 15 to 20% owned. Instead, his ownership's being kept in check. Same thing with guys like Akila Keith, Ricky Fowler, only about 10% owned. You do have a few outliers, though. So a few like unicorns when you get into the 8K range. First unicorn would be a Davis Thompson, who's nearly 20% owned. I know he nearly won here last year. He kind of finally showed some form last week. Before that, it was a real tough scene for Davis. It was just like missed cut after missed cut. So I think he's a pretty easy fade on a week like this. But outside of him, the ownership is, like I said, pretty spread out. But guys like Rasmus Højgaard, he's into the single-digit ownership range. I've even got a Minwoo Lee a little bit under that 10% mark. So even if you are using, let's say, a Cantlay, a Keegan, a Ben Griffin, who's like 28, 29% owned, you're going to have spots in the 6 and 7K range for sure to get that differentiation to the field. But even in this 8 and 9K range, there are a few players that you can use to get some leverage with the rest of your lineup. So that's why I always say it's not who you play, it's how you play them in your lineups that matters. And let's say that you use 10%er in this range, and you do have somebody up top. Let's say that is 25 to 30% owned. All you have to do in that 6 and 7K range is throw in 1-2 guys that are sub 5% owned, and you're going to be good in most contests. And if you are in like the biggest of the GPPs, the ones that are like 60 to 70,000 entries, then maybe it's like, instead of going 1 or 2 pivots, maybe it's like 1.5 to 2.5 pivots that you're taking towards the bottom. Now, going 3 might be a little bit too far, but you get the idea. There can be guys that are in the middle. You can take like an averagely owned player as like your half pivot down towards the bottom. There are ways to navigate playing some 25 to 30%ers. So keep that in mind as well. Another thing I'll say with ownership is that down in the 6 and 7K range, that it becomes even more important than what we have up top. And because I run my own website, have my own projections and whatnot, I do have to keep some of the projections behind the paywall. But what I'll say is that towards the bottom end of the board is that the ownership decisions become even more important for myself. So if somebody is going to be, let's say, double, 3 times the ownership of the players around them, unless I liked them on a Monday, so kind of like the same policy I had towards the top, you're not going to see me using them towards the bottom end of the board. And, there might be an exception once in a blue moon that I'm playing mega chalk towards the bottom. That's usually when there's like a glaring misprice, like the DraftKings algorithm just kind of like screwed up. And we have somebody that's like $1,500 to $2,000 too cheap. And it's like indisputable that is the case. I might still play a piece of chalk in the 7K range. It's rare, but there's a time and place where I will make that kind of exception. But like on a slate like this, where there's no one, I mean, at least to my knowledge, at least with how I handicap it, there's no one that's like obviously $2,000 too cheap. A lot of those players are going to be a fade for me. So like a Steven Yeager wouldn't be a great example. He's actually one of the more popular players in this range, but I did like him on a Monday, so I'm going to continue to use him. But we're going to point out a few diamonds in the rough now that I'll be getting to that are going to all be low owned. And I think that's the key. If you're going to try and take some leverage, and if you're going to add some guys to your player pool that you didn't love on a Monday, then make them guys that are sub 5%. So like a Max Homa, for example, he's had a bunch of top 25s at this golf course. Now, is that like elite tier course history? I think that'd be stretching it with good old Max Homa, but T21, T24, T25 over there 4 years ago. It's doable, especially with somebody that's won so many times on the PGA Tour before. And we don't need a win at 7,300. We just need, top 10, top 5 would for sure lock it in as an optimal play on this sort of week. And he's a PM wave player too. So just like I was saying before, where like I want the guys that I'm adding late, my lower owned players, to be some of those PM wave guys. If there's going to be a sort of weather edge, maybe he gets like that half a stroke edge in his favor. We'll have to see. But even without that, makes a lot of sense at that low ownership because of his track record around here. And that those like T22s, those T24s or whatever aren't really enough. He does have to improve on that. But considering that he's like a 6 or 7 time tour winner, I don't think that that's outside of his range of outcomes whatsoever. I'm also going Ricky Castillo as one of these kind of diamonds in the rough that I want to point out. And notice once again, super low ownership. He's only 3.9% projected owned in my projections. And he's a PM wave player. Another thing I want to point out about it, and somebody that makes a lot of birdies. If you take a look at the birdie or better percentage, you take a look at the shots gained ball striking off the tee and approach play, he checks a lot of those boxes. So yeah, no brainer for me if he's going to be significantly lower owned than the other players around him. And Pot Gator, he was one of the guys that talked up in my video on Monday. He is also PM wave, so that's good to see. And also relatively low owned. So shout out to the Pot Getter. He could definitely be in play this week. And then the last guy I want to point out here, just to give you guys an example of what I'm talking about, would be like Beau Hossler. Because even if you're using like a 25, 30%er towards the top, you throw in a Beau Hossler. Let's say you throw in, let's see, maybe not Castillo. Let's go to the Max Homa. Max Homa at $7,300. If those are your value plays towards the bottom, I mean, you're going to more than make up for that ownership you're taking towards the top. So that's why I really like these guys in large field GPPs to help me offset the kind of the game theory edge that I'm trying to get to. And he's PM wave as well. He's also only $6,900. And what I like about Beau, at least at this golf course, is that you don't have to be that accurate off the tee. It's the same thing with Castillo. He's a little bit of a sprayer off the tee at times. Beau Hossler is certainly a sprayer. It's he has a hard time even keeping it on the planet at times. So I think that would be an understatement to say that. But he's 1.3% owned. He's got a lot of experience compared to the guys around him. And we've seen him, especially at like the easier golf courses over the last few years, randomly show up in top 10 out of nowhere in cracked slates open. So, there's some players down here towards the bottom that are getting that steam. And just to point out a few, I'm actually going to bring up my spreadsheet so I can give you guys a few examples of players that maybe are getting some steam towards the bottom end of the board. But in the 6K range, there's not really anyone that's noteworthy there. I mean, your highest owned player, I think, was like 3-4% when it comes to the 6K range players. But in the 7K range, you do see some players that are getting a little bit more steam there. So, for example, like a Rio Hisatune, I've got a little bit higher owned than the guys around him. Heck, even like 3-4 times higher owned on players that are directly priced at $7,200. But Emiliano Grillo, with the kind of form that he has heading in, he's the number 3 player in the field when it comes to shots gained total. Benny Ann, I've got getting a little bit of steam as well. I mean, we already mentioned Steven Jaeger as one of the players that's getting some steam. And I'd say Ryan Gerard, too, at $7,900 would be another notable player that's going to be a little bit higher owned than most people would expect. It's not to say that you have to fade every single player that we just went through on there, but I'll say that of those players we just mentioned, I think there's only one of them that I have in my player pool. And actually, it's 2 of them, I should say, that I have. And you guys know about Steven Jaeger at $7,700. And then one of those other guys I'm using in my lineups for this week. So the rest of them, right, if you don't love them, anyone that's super high owned, just yank them out of your player pool. And in my opinion, it's not worth taking, especially at a birdie fest like this. That being said, let's go through any player deep dives that you've got for me in the chat. So anyone that you're curious about could be shots gained metrics, my opinion in general. Just go ahead and let me know. We'll go through those now. And then we're going to wrap it up with a little bit of strategy afterwards. So where we leave off, we got thoughts on Beau Hossler. Look at that. Great timing with that one, Colin. I like him as a good GPP play. Like, you wouldn't use him in a single entry. You certainly wouldn't use him in anything like over $100 entry fee, or at least I wouldn't. That's far beyond my risk tolerance. But if you're in like the $5 or $25, you've got a real chalky combination up top. Let's say like maybe 2 guys over 20%, because like you could start with, let's say, one of those top 3 that's over 20%, and then go like Cam Young as your second man in. If you're starting with that kind of start, that's where Beau Hossler comes in handy. So I'm using them, but I think there's a lot of guys down low that you could say a lot of the same things about, high upside players that have shown top 10 upside before that are sub 2% owned. So don't just limit yourself to a Bo Hostler, for example. There's a lot of other guys around him you guys might want to take a look at as well. Smalley ranking. So yeah, I'll give you a 1 through 10 on my guy, Alex Smalley. The form has cooled off substantially from where it was earlier this year. I mean, there was a time where Smalley was mega chalk, still playing really well though. I mean, so I say, calm down like substantially, but he's still gaining over a stroke per round with his ball striking stats. So I guess put some respect on Smalley's name. You can see the last 24 rounds. So outside of him getting hot over the last few events, it was starting to calm down a bit. And that's why I had those preconceived notions. But yeah, in terms of the shots gained profile, he's a 6.5, a 7 out of 10. The issue I have with Smalley is that it's not all about the shots gained at this golf course, because I look at things like birdie or better percentage, also putting. Putting really matters at a birdie fest, and that's, of course, the real big issue for Alex. He's a loser with the putter over the last 24 rounds, albeit only ever so slightly into the negative, so it's really not that big of an issue. Last 12 measured rounds, it's been a little bit more negative, closer to 0.2 strokes lost per round, but I mean, still 6.5 out of 10 at the very worst. I mean, maybe even slightly better than that. If we take a look at the history at this golf course, he has gone cut T47 cut. So yeah, maybe the 6 out of 10 is a better ranking just because of that course history. But yeah, I can't say that much negative about him, man. In fact, shots gained metrics a little bit better than I gave him credit for. What's going on, Rick? Welcome on in. Good evening to yourself as well. Who do I trust more between Siwoo or Hideki? Trust isn't a word that I like to use with Siwoo, especially Hideki with his withdrawal risk. And I know that's why you asked the question. It's choosing between a rock and a hard place. So asking the tough questions, as you always do, Nick. If I had to choose, and it's kind of psychotic to trust one of those two, I guess Hideki, because Hideki hasn't had the injury risk lately, but he's synonymous with the withdrawal. But Siwoo Kim withdrew the last time he was playing. So that's why I would say maybe Hideki, but dude, he could withdraw too. None of us would be surprised at all if that was the case. Harry Higgs should be a slam dunk, right? Oh, let's look at the shots gained metrics. I know that I saw a few people pointing them out, so I have a feeling we're going to be pleasantly surprised when we look at this. Get to the other Hig. You had Garrick Higo on there, of course. Shots gained metrics are sneaky good, I'd say, for the big rig. I mean, losing off the tee could be better, but I mean, I've seen him lose half a stroke to a stroke per round before. When he's off the tee, he's horrendous in that category. Gaining with the approach play, and then, I mean, the around the green play, losing 0.8 strokes per round, that's obviously an issue. But if that's going to be the one category that's well into the negative, then, it's like a 3.5, a 4 out of 10 stat profile. But I've seen worse things, especially from the big rig before. And if we want to go to the last 24 rounds, just to zoom out, maybe give ourselves a little bit of a larger sample size, he's gaining ball striking over that stretch. This is what I was actually expecting to see over the last 12 measured rounds. Knew the iron play has been there, but off the tee play, usually a little bit sharper for Harry than what you saw over those last 3 to 4 starts. So 4 to 10 stat profile, which for a $6,300 golfer, let's remind ourselves who we're dealing with. We're talking about somebody with sub 1% ownership, sub 2% ownership, somebody that no one's going to get to. He's not a slam dunk play. You wouldn't be throwing him in your single entries or anything like that. But could you throw him into your 150 max pool in the big $5 or $25 GPP? For sure you could. I'm not doing it myself, but it's in play. That's for sure. In fact, I like rooting for the guy. I kind of wish I had him in there now. Thoughts on more Cabo with the caddy news for this week? Yeah, so that narrative stuff, I usually try to ignore it as much as I can. It's tough to do sometimes. Like, there's exceptions where I do change my process based on narrative, but the vast majority of the time that I do, I end up regretting it after the fact. So I would say, like, it's not great that he's just changing caddies week after week. He's obviously trying to figure some stuff out, whether it's with his swing, whether it's with the team around him. Caddy, obviously, in flux over the last month or so, but he's still a stud. He is one of the lowest owned guys in the 10K range. We'll see what happens with the ownership. I think there's a chance, Chris. I guess really the only proper take on that situation is that I think it's going to lower his ownership. Like, there's a chance that people take him out of their player pool because of what they saw there. Does that mean that he's a great play? Probably not. he's dealing with a lot of stuff right now. But I think the proper take from that is that he's going to be a little bit lower out because of some of that. What time is the Italian Open stream? DP World Tour Sweaty Tryhard. Nick is in the chat. Yeah, not my specialty at this point, but I need your help, Nick. If we're ever going to do a DP World Tour live stream, it'd have to be a dual cast with you because I need you for half of the field in these breakdowns. I'm not as much as an expert on it as you are, Nick. I know you watch every single event over there, and I can only say that about some of the events overseas. What's going on, Alan? You said they delayed entry for the Pro-Am by 3 hours due to the course being wet. They won't hesitate to pull these guys off the course because it gets mushy super quick. Yeah, so that's why that potential edge on Friday is so much in limbo, and you can't feel good about wanting to stack it with a large portion of your portfolio. Is because if they delay, which, like you said, is very possible, it would take that completely away, or at least most of that away. So good call on that, and it's unfortunate. In Florida, it could rain. We'd be out there in 5 minutes. Detroit's going to be a different story. Just different levels of readiness when it comes to that moisture. You mean Harry eating a grand slam? Yeah, exactly. He's a grand slam in terms of eating. I'm not sure in terms of a play. Shots gained profile, though. Don't sleep on that. I've seen worse. Luke, let's talk about fellow Luke with Clanton. Yeah, so I think it's a great spot for him. I mean, it was really the first time on tour that we saw him take that step forward, get into contention as an amateur. I would say that the golf course fits his style of golf court quite well. He's a aggressive player. He goes for the par fives. He's a good wedge player too, which is kind of what you need on the shorter par fours. I like him quite a bit. I also like the fact that, and I hate to say that, I like the fact that he didn't play well last week, but selfishly, as somebody that wants to use him in DFS, I'm glad that he didn't go scorched earth, top 5, top 10, and end up at like 25% ownership this week. Instead, still, I think played very respectable golf, was in tee times with some of the world's best players, has been ever since becoming a professional. When he starts to settle down a bit, watch out. He'll get back to those top 10s, those top 20s that we were seeing early on. Ben Griffin, you, sir, are donkey chalk, and we don't play donkey chalk. Yeah, I'm not playing him this week. I'll just say that. Full transparency on Ben Griffin. I'm not playing him at nearly 30%. We need a video at the end like DGen did at Major Week. I don't want to steal DGen's stuff, but if I love what he did too. I mean, that was my favorite part about the live streams that he did. So if that's something that you guys want to incorporate, maybe I can talk to the editor about it. I'm not against it. It's not going to be anywhere near as good as DGen's. I mean, let's be frank about it. He was borderline comedian level comedy with some of the stuff he'd throw on there. And I'm far from that. So, hey, if we can make it work, I'm for it. But we'll see it logistically if we can, because like you said, it was a lot of fun, and I missed that a lot. What's going on, Chris? You guys are cracking me up with the donkey chalk stuff. Who has a better chance to win, your namesake Nick Dunlop or my namesake Luke Clanton? Luke Clanton for sure, and it's not really close. And it's kind of wild to say that because Nick Dunlop's won twice on the PGA Tour before. And as some of you may know, and I'm just going to throw this on the record as many times as possible because I want people to know this if I end up being right about it. I did bet Nick Dunlop to win this event. So that's why Nick ends up asking that. It's crazy to say that Clanton's got a better chance to win, but he does. I mean, let's just be honest about it. But Nick Dunlop, it would not surprise me. And I know it wouldn't surprise you, Nick. We've talked about this a lot this week. If he went out there and won this week, he's just PGA Tour winners are winners for a reason. And it doesn't matter how shitty the form is. Sometimes it comes out of nowhere and you get all that coming together. And so we'll see. I just want to throw that out there. If you saw my video on Monday, you guys know the full take for it. I went through a lot of shots, game metrics. I went through a lot of shots on Nick Dunlop to see how he was playing last week. Well, actually wasn't that bad the last few days. So that's why I took that shot on him. It's going to get me in trouble. He's probably going to shoot +8 tomorrow. But if he doesn't, he shoots like -6. That would be a lot of fun. Let's put it that way. I've had a lot of people saying that it's not going to go well doing so, which, by the way, like, that's not a hot take. I think most people would agree with that, right? Like, playing Nick Dunlop's probably not a good thing. But hey, if I get him at sub 1% ownership and he top 5 or wins, God forbid again, you're going to have him. And I'm going to be glad that he's in my player pool if that happens. Can I deep dive Alex Noren? And he said, well, I guess we'll go to the Chris Gotterup question first. I'll get to you in a second, Jose. Is Chris Gotterup worth the 8K tag? So it's really a question about the price tag with Chris Gotterup. I mean, he's kind of been priced up for a while now. So I wouldn't say that it's egregious for him to be $8,000, but in some of these weaker field events, I mean, alternate field events, he's been in the 9K range at times. But like even when we've gone to like, mid-tier events, in between majors, in between signature events, kind of like we have here, he's been like $7,700. So I think that there's a little bit of sticker shock when you get somebody like Gotterup and he just creeps into that 8K range. But if he was $7,900, we wouldn't bat an eye at it. In fact, that's probably why some people haven't batted an eye at it over the last month or so, because he usually hasn't been in the 8K range. A lot of times he has just been in the top end of the 7Ks, which looks a whole lot different psychologically from even just being $8,000, which could only be $100, $200, $300 difference compared to where he was before. So I like the ownership on Gotterup. I'll just throw it out there too. He's in my player pool as a slightly lower owned player. Jose says, can I deep dive Alex Noren? We absolutely can. So Noren doesn't usually scream like Birdie Fest, but at a field like this, like if it was a signature field event, I probably wouldn't want to get to Alex Noren. It's at least within reason that he could get there. Shots gained metrics over the last 12 measured rounds, though, aren't as ideal for him. You can see losing strokes in the 2 ball striking categories. It's a slight concern. It's not the end of the world, though, especially when you go to the last 24 rounds and he's gaining across all 4 stat categories. That's partially because of how well he played at the PGA Championship. Quail Hollow, that top 5 finish, is where a lot of these positive shots gained are coming from. But he did it at a major championship, and he did it at Quail Hollow, his first or second week back after having a massive layoff from injury. So, yeah, he's real risky, I would say, but I would rather play a risky high upside option like Noren in the 7K range than a piece of mega chalk that you don't believe in that's priced around him. So for example, I do like Jaeger. I do believe in him. So I'm still using him in my lineups. But if you aren't such a believer on Jaeger, which I'd say a lot of you out there probably shouldn't be as much of a believer as I am out here on that play, especially at like 15%, I'd rather play Noren than that, because he's going to be significantly lower owned. So it all kind of depends on your take on these guys. But I mean, even for somebody like myself that does like Jaeger, like I've got to say, like back in my mind, the proper pivot has to be Noren there, especially for most people watching this. What's going on, Ross? Who says Luke and Nick mini stack? Oh boy, that'd be fun to see. I guess not an amateur anymore in either case, but the 2 young guns going at it. Neckbeard is always a side click. Yeah, he's a... By the way, I almost thought you said side chick there for a second. I see you said side click. Maybe that's what we're referring to with that. Yeah, if you're not a big believer in the Neckbeard this week, you can fade him too. He's 25% in, so I wouldn't be against that. Not sure what the guy's asking about. KJ Joe, no idea. Is this a heavier GPP week with the amount of wild outcomes and unicorns that could do well? I think so, Chris. That's how I'm playing this week. I don't have any single entries in right now. It could end up being that the chalk all ends up hitting, though. Like we always say that until it ends up not being the case. But in theory, Birdie Fests usually are that way, just because, I mean, you have those random guys like Amex, great example. American Express, tons of variance there. I mean, how we have an amateur win a couple of years ago. But even outside of like that example, you have like guys like Paul Barjon. I mean, the Paul Barjon special, whole randomly top 5 at that event after literally not even playing on tour for like 5-6 months. You get that this week as well. So I think there's some truth to what you're saying there. Who's a guy that I really like sub $7,000? It's going to get me in trouble, but Nick Dunlop, I like it $6,300. If I bet him outright, I obviously like him this week. So if we're going to be a little bit more realistic about it, we'd probably go with somebody like a Bo Hostler at like $6,900. Thoughts on Adam Schenk? So my first reaction there is like almost no reaction. It's almost like a 5 out of 10. But just to do the proper deep dive and maybe refine that take, ball striking has been off the last few starts, which does kind of have to lower our ranking on him in a bit, probably even to like a 3.5 or 4. Short game, though, has been about a neutral, not really that much of a hot take there. That's 24 rounds, though, so zoom out a bit more, losing across all 4 categories, especially the fact that he's $6,700. And I know that's not expensive, well below the average salary, in fact, at that sort of number. But you would think that because he's $6,700, that like he's done something lately. It's shown us, a decent amount of form or something. And that just hasn't been the case. So, I was potentially gonna, raise them to like a 4 or 5 out of 10 if the shots gain metrics had been a little bit better. But yeah, I think like a 3.5 is the proper ranking. It's been a little bit of a tough scene for him with the form lately. Saying Homa looks good just to make you throw up in your mouth a bit. Totally get that and don't mind them. Yeah, I mean, it's tough to say. I mean, the Nick Dunlap one is the one that literally makes me want to throw up in my mouth. But I'm never one to shy away from being wrong about things. Like, I know there's touts out there. I had one of my buddies, by the way, that does golf content reach out and go, I can't believe that, you'd put your name behind that and have the stones to do so. I've made worse decisions before, plenty of times before. And I know that no one's perfect. So I'm willing to take that and fall on the sword a little bit at times because I've also had those takes before and they've worked out and won me GPPs. Just a couple. One really comes to mind was Eric Cole's coming out party at the Cognizant Classic. I was the only person that week that had any semblance of any idea who the hell he was, partially because he's from my hometown. But that week, he top 5, nearly won the damn event that week. There's been a lot of examples where I've even said ahead of time, like, this is probably a terrible idea, then it's worked out. But there's also been plenty of times, worth mentioning as well, where I've said that and the guys finished like dead last. Thurston Lawrence this year kind of comes to mind. We got to add the other side of that one too. Thurston Lawrence, I've played this year and he's coming dead last, but I also played him when he nearly won the golf tournament in the major a couple weeks ago. So that one was fun. Jake Knapp. So it's not really a Knapp style course, but I haven't heard anything about Jake Knapp this week, and he's going under the radar. So that makes me like him quite a bit because the ball striking stats have been sneaky good for him, gaining in the 3 tee to green categories. Even if we go to the last 24 rounds and zoom out a little bit more, he does slightly lose with the approach play, but still, decent enough stat profile. Like you'd probably think because you haven't heard him all week or you haven't seen him on leaderboards for a while, that he's playing like horrendous golf. I mean, it's not to his standards. I'm sure he wishes that he would have played a lot better than he has over this last 24 round sample size, but that's been in signature event fields. That's been in majors for Jake Knapp, which hasn't always been the case for him. And another example, and he's right here. So I think it's just another person that I want to kind of shout out this week. Like I love Bridgman. I'm playing Bridgman and I believe I have Knapp in lineups too. I'm not 100% sure on that one. I have to double check on Knapp, but I know for sure I'm playing Jacob Bridgman this week. And it's the same idea with Knapp because sure, the shots gain metrics don't look as good as some of the other guys around him. But what we have to realize is that with guys like Knapp and Bridgman that earned their way into the signature field events, that earned their way into major championships, played in fields that are exponentially harder and stronger than a lot of the other players around them. So if we're looking at the shots gained metrics and we're crucifying them for that, I think that's a mistake. Like if you're fading some of these guys or all of these guys, it's not even just these two. There's, some guys that had some pretty decent form earlier this year and that, maybe have quote unquote cooled off a bit over the last month or so. I think part of that, and this is something I'm still trying to kind of refine, but I did this with the week that Hovland won. I bet him that week. I pointed him out, I even said ahead of time, this might be the time that Hovland wins. It was one of my better hot takes I've ever given ever in my career breaking down golf, but it was this same idea. And that's why I'm kind of leaning into it a little bit more because I think I'm onto something here is the field strength, especially with the signature fields and getting into majors, et cetera, it throws off our analysis of a lot of these players because they took a step forward. They showed us that form for a few months and they earned themselves into a better opportunity. And yeah, no crap. They're not going to gain as many strokes now when they're playing against Rory, Scotty Scheffler, Xander Schauffele, Bryson, Brooks in the major championships. When they were showing us that form and when they kind of like made their own on tour, they were playing Cognizant Classic. They were playing Puerto Rico Open. I mean, you get the idea, right? The slapdick fest that we have around the PGA Tour. You've got to keep in mind field strength, and I haven't found a perfect way to do it yet, but like Jake Knapp, Bridgman are a perfect example of guys that are playing better than the form would indicate. So to answer your question, I know that was a long one. I think he's in play, especially at lower ownership. Zhang is an absolute bomber. Yeah, I remember him when he was on tour a few years ago. Kind of a shame that he lost his status, but we'll see how he fares this week. It would be a good comeback story if he could do something good. Pick 2 out of these 3. You got Jaeger, Taylor Moore, and Noren. So Jaeger for sure. And be one of the 3 because he's one of my placement bets. He's one of my conviction plays. So he's an easy one to pick out there. Between Moore and Noren, I lean more just because it's a birdie fest and he has a little bit of a better play style for this course, but his ownership is also higher than Noren's. Noren is getting a little bit less steam. So yeah, Jaeger for sure. The other ones, I'd say it's a 50-50 there, man. I don't really have a hot take between one of those two players. Pick Kim, or pick a Kim, you said, between Michael Kim, Tom Kim, and Siwoo. So I'm playing all three of them. So that's a tough one. Actually, I'm playing at least 2 out of 3, I should say, in my player pool. If I had to just pick one that seemingly seems like my favorite, it'd probably be Tom Kim. It's not like I think Tom Kim projects the best. He doesn't. I mean, projection-wise, it's Siwoo, Michael Kim, Tom Kim. Pretty simple how I'd rank those 3. But the reason why I say Tom Kim might be my favorite play this week is he's a tour winner before. He plays well at Birdie Fest. You saw him win the Shriners in back-to-back years. That's a course with a winning score, 20, even past 20 under par, that wins that kind of thing. Give me a sneaky Tom Kim. I know he didn't look that good at the Travelers, but he could have been worse. DP World Tour winner, first round leader parlays should be a segment. If I knew enough about it, Terry, I absolutely would. Maybe we can get our guy Nick in there to help us out, but you don't want to be hearing my take on that. I don't follow it nearly enough to be doing videos on it. Kep says, thanks for doing the show. Of course, man. You bet Nick Dunlap too. Those odds were straight up disrespectful. Hey, and if he ends up winning, we can do the victory lap of all victory laps. And if he doesn't win, he misses the cut by 10. We can kind of say I knew it anyways, right? Like that's the truth. He's probably missing the cut, but there's at least an outcome or a way that he gets there. Let's put it that way. Let's just get this guy out of here. There's somebody being disrespectful to other chatters. We're just not going to stand for that. Bar Down says, is there a stat formula that takes DFS dollars spent in fantasy points or something like that? So yes, Bar Down. So the way that you can do that, at least I think I get what you're saying there, is you can find like how efficient a player is with their projection. What I do with that is I take a player's projection and I divide it by their salary, and then I multiply it by, I think it's 100, it might be 1,000 that I multiply it by. But what that does, it'll give you a number between like the 5 to 10 range. And that should give you a pretty good measure. And you obviously do that with every single player, right? You divide their projection by their salary and then you normalize it a bit. And then that can give you a pretty good sense of that. So some sites do it differently. That's how mine usually does it when I show like a points per dollar thing. Can I please deep dive John Pock? Maybe a better showdown play. Yeah, he's a risky one, but if you're in a large field GPP, it could be a lot of the same. Like we're looking for high upside in showdown. We're also looking for a high upside in those large field GPPs. And over the last 12 measured rounds, he's gaining 0.8 strokes approach per round. So I've seen much worse plays down low. Like if you're trying to find somebody with some upside, that could be John Pock. Norman Zhang, by the way, I know his stats aren't coming from PGA Tour fields, but holy smokes, 2 shots gained ball striking. I can see why Nick said he was a striper. He said not viable this week, but any chance Aaron Wise can get back to where he once was. So yeah, I think you're right about probably not wanting to use him on a week like this, but could he get back to where he was? Of course, man. I mean, golf is a sport where you can play it till you're 70, 80. So physically, I'm sure he's just fine. The problem is getting all of that repetition back, because golf, especially your golf swing, feel around the green, feel on the greens, is something that you can only get by hitting thousands and thousands of golf balls. So I'm not 100% sure how big of a step back he took from the game. I don't think that's widely publicized yet, whether he was still practicing, keeping up with his training regimen while he took that step away to fix his mental health. But yeah, I mean, he could get back. I mean, I don't see why not. It's just going to be super tough, especially when you're off for that many years. However, great example, Daniel Berger was out of golf for 1.5 years, 2 years, and he ended up being just fine when it was all said and done. Thoughts on Lee Hodges and GPPs? And he said, and the course fit. Course fit is like a 5 out of 10. I don't really lean too much on Ryan, on him in either direction, Ryan. The reason I say that is he's not a bomber. He doesn't really fit like the wide open aspect of this golf course that well. In fact, he's actually pretty accurate, which is never a problem, but a lot of like the quote unquote good course fits are aggressive players that miss some fairways. However, Hodges is still decent GPP play because he's not getting that kind of ownership. He's especially compared to some of the other guys priced around him, he's got some of the better pedigree of any of those players. It's not the worst play I've ever seen, that's for sure. Not sure what this guy is saying. Thirsty Lawrence, you get a pass on this year's Open in the major a few weeks back. True boom bust play. That's what I'm saying, man. You're like, I've played him and he's finished in last, but also I've taken advantage when he's finished top 5. So it's just like, you've got to be willing to take the downside with those players, right? Like, before submitting that guy into a lineup that like 90% of the time, he's not going to get there. But with guys in the 6K range, 99% of them aren't getting there anyways, right? So like, you're comparing them to other guys that have next to no floor. All that really matters is whether they can actually get to the top 5 and win the damn thing, which we know Dunlap can do that. And we know Thurston Lawrence can do that too. So that's why they're the 2 suckers I play the most down there. And yeah, if you're not first, you're last. That is exactly right. How about Whaley? You like his numbers across the board? So yeah, I've seen a lot of love for him this week. So the shots gained metrics, I think, have a lot to do with that, and kind of like the things that you're looking at as well. If I could spell Whaley right, it'd be a little bit easier to get this up here. So Whaley gaining off the tee just could have been a little better with the approach play, I would say. If you go to the last 24 rounds, you can see he is gaining with the approach play over that sample size. Yeah, I like him at Birdie Fest too. Like, you don't play Whaley when conditions are going to be super tough, but you do play him when the winning score is like past 15 under par. I'm showing Bridgman, Knapp, and here's Whaley staring you at the best stats of the 3. Yeah, so that's what's crazy about it, Nick, right? He might have the best stats of the 3, but let's keep in mind what fields they're playing. Vince Whaley is not in signature field events. He's not in the major championships either. He might have gone into like one of the first 3, I think. Certainly not Augusta, but maybe US Open, maybe PGA Championship. I don't think he did, though. In either case, that makes a big difference when you're looking at those. So I think that kind of drives home my point, right? Like, a lot of people probably are going to flock to Whaley. Whaley's, in fact, even higher owned than those other 2. And at least in my opinion, it's just my opinion, I think that the other 2 players are like clearly better than Vince Whaley. I'd rather have Hisatune out of those 2. Form's a little bit more consistent for Rio, and the ownership, though, is higher on Rio too. So that's, of course, assuming that you've got differentiation elsewhere. I'd probably go with the Rio side. Echeverria for a 1 through 10. So he's a sneaky good play sites. I'm at like an 8 out of 10. I love him this week. In fact, I don't want to love on him too much here to steam up the ownership, but he's a high birdie percentage guy, top 50 guy in birdie or better percentage. You play him at courses where he can have that boom bust potential. He misses a lot of cuts. We know that about Nico, especially his first year on tour. He missed like 20 of his 25 cuts or something, but he had a win at an alternate field event and then another top 5 finish where he nearly won after that in a much stronger field event. And then this year, I mean, he added the win at Zozo. So he added on top of that first win that he was able to post. And now, rather than missing like 20 of his 25 cuts, now it's only like half the cuts that he misses, but he still has that volatility to his game. But there's a reason why I have him at 8 out of 10. It's a massive but. That volatility is great when you're in a large field GPP. It's great. Like, that's why I like Dunlap. That's why I like guys like Thurston Lawrence at super low ownership, is because when they get there, they make it count. You think Seamus Power is a sneaky play? I think sneaky is a good way to put it. I don't know if he's my favorite play, but the ownership, if you're looking for a pivot, should be lower than a lot of the other guys around him. So if the sneaky part is the ownership aspect, would certainly agree with that. And we're going to wrap this off with a little bit of game theory and putting together a lineup on DraftKings. Do want to say that the contests are filling up rather quickly. I forgot to reserve myself until just before the live stream, which I was able to do to get into my $5 150 max, but that one was almost full. So make sure to get into that if you guys are trying to enter that. I believe that there was this one right here, in fact, which has less than 1,000 entries left, about 1,000 entries left to fill up. But the $25 GPP, I think, is either filled or it's really close to filling as well. So make sure you reserve your entries as fast as humanly possible. And I'm always going to say this, even if this time it's the Spark Notes version, make sure that you're entering sustainable contests if you want to have sustainable results in terms of your stuff. So what I mean by that is, if you don't want to have the absolute nuts, you don't want to have that to win any money back, then enter single entries. Enter the smaller field stuff where you can finish top 5, top 10 and still get a good payout for it. If you're okay with the lottery aspect, you're okay having to beat 70,000 entries like I'm trying to do in this 150 max I went with, then go with those contests, but just kind of know what you're getting yourself into is what I want to say. But with the lineup construction, there's not that much we have to be careful of. I mean, it's mostly the ownership, which we've talked about mostly during this live stream, but maybe you do want to go to like a PM stack, right? That could be something to add on top of that. So what we're going to do here is I'm going to build a PM stack for a large field GPP and kind of show you what that might look like. So up top, one of the only PM guys you can take would either be Ben Griffin or Hideki. I'm going to go Hideki because Hideki is much lower owned than Ben Griffin. Also, I'm fading Ben Griffin this week, so kind of makes that decision easy. Then we're going to go with Luke Clanton as our next man in. So he's $9,000, also PM wave. PM is going to be the case for all 6 players here. That's just kind of the idea of what we're going with. Not all my lineups are going to be built this way. In fact, of the lineups I built, 10% were built with this sort of an edge. But let's start with Hideki. Let's go Clanton as the next man in the 8K range. Let's see, is Minwoo Lee PM? He is not. Unfortunately, is on the AM side. Let's go Keith Mitchell as at towards the top end of the 8K range is our next man in. So 3 PM guys, and we've got slightly lower owned Hideki Matsuyama, Clanton, Mitchell, who are in the lower teens in ownership. Heck, it might even be closer to like 11, 12% ownership and large field GPPs. So we'll be totally fine with the ownership component so far. Chris Gotterup, I believe he's also PM wave. Let's double check on that one. So yeah, he's on that side of the tee times. And for our last 2 players here, we want to probably take sub 5%ers, but because we weren't taking this 25, 30%ers at the top, I mean, we don't have to go with like mega pivots as our last man in here. So for example, like a Tom Kim would be a pretty good low-owned guy to take. There's a few other guys here too that I think are on the PM side that you could mix in. But even if you wanted to play Steven Yeager, who is on the PM side of tee time, so he would fit this kind of lineup, you could get away with it because we've already started to compensate for the ownership a bit. And for your last man in, you probably are going to want a sub 5%er just because we don't have one in this lineup quite yet. And this is for the big $5 or $25 GPP. But at $6,900, most of these guys, if not all of them, are going to be sub 5% anyways. So pretty much no matter who you round off this lineup with, you should be fine in terms of duplicating yourself and giving yourself enough leverage in those large field GPPs. So that's why I'm so adamant about fading some of those 25, 30%ers, especially if you don't love them. But as you guys know, like I'm a fan of Cantley. I'm still a fan of playing guys like Cam Young at that like 20, 25% mark. Cantlay's AM, so that's why we didn't throw him into that lineup. I guess we could have gone with Cam Young because he was on the PM side of things, but it's not the end all be all, right? Even if we did start a lineup with, let's say, Cam Young, who was a little bit chalkier, and let's say Hideki Matsuyama, well, all you have to do is maybe added 1 pivot. So rather than going down here and going to like Gotterup, who's closer to like 10% owned, maybe that's where we drop down and try and find somebody that's a little bit sneakier. So for example, like I know he's not PM wave, but like maybe a Noren could have been used there. A Ryan Gerard is going to get some ownership, but going down to a Nikolai Højgaard, like he's going to be closer to like 6-7% projected owns. That could be how you pull off that sort of thing up top if you want to play somebody that's just a little bit chalkier. So that's what I've got for the live stream, guys. Best of luck with all of your exposure for this week. I hope to see a lot of your names towards the top end of those GPPs, whether it's in the $5 or $25, some of those single entries. Let me know how you guys are doing after the first couple rounds, and make sure to stop on by for rounds 2 to 4 showdown. We'll be doing live streams just like we had here, getting you guys ready for all of that action. So it'll be probably a half an hour to an hour after play ends. We'll be going live on here, going through what to expect for the next day. And of course at 8 p.m. Eastern time. So that's just in 2 minutes here. I'm going to be live on my YouTube channel going through all the prop and betting stuff for round number 1 as well. So if you're in sites like Underdog and Prize Picks, make sure to stop on by for that. We're going to be going through stat averages last year, weather for round 1, pin locations as well, really deep diving conditions of what you can expect for Thursday, which can be helpful for DFS. There's a lot that we go through there that is a little bit of a deeper dive than what we're able to do here on the DFS side. So stop on by for that, as well as for any of that prop stuff too, if those are websites that you're already playing on. And that's all I've got. Other than that, you can check out the Patreon page. There's where I have all my projections. That spreadsheet that you saw that was a little bit censored on there. Of course, the uncensored version is posted up for there on my Patreon members. And of course, make sure to check out the SHIPIT Nation website because they've got all of their content posted for this week on there too. But that's all, guys. Best of luck, as I said. I appreciate you guys showing love on the content as you guys always do. Thoughts on Akshay? So I'll give you the Spark Notes version because I do have to hop on out of here. Live stream starting in a minute. He's like a 6.5 out of 10. Unfortunately, the ownership's a little bit over the average too. So like I mean, if he was average to below average ownership, I would love Akshay this week. But I think that the ownership and how I like him this week, like a 6.5 out of 10, are kind of aligned there, a little bit better than average in both cases. And then you said thoughts on Clark. I bet Clark this week. So I love him. I think he really fits this style of golf course well. And the ownership's not that crazy either. So I think he's squarely in play for this week. But that's all I've got, guys. I appreciate you guys stopping by as per usual. And I'll see you guys at the prop and betting stream here in just a minute or so.